Hello guys, what's going on? I'm back home from the US, back in Brazil. I posted a lot of videos here in the channel. I went to New York City, Chicago, and Boston, which was amazing. And I'm a big fan of the US, man. You're so damn rich. It's insane. I always get impressed how rich America is. It's insane. But anyways, um, I want to talk to you a little bit about this book here, Tariffs, Blockades, and Inflation: The Economics of the Civil War, by Mark Thornton, which is a very, famous economist from Mises Institute, and Robert B. Eklund Jr. This one I didn't know, a bit less, famous. And the title of the book is very auto-explicative, but it's you can tell what the book's gonna talk about by the title, and so it talks about the economics of the Civil War, but through the lens of the Austrian School of Economics, and of the method of praxeology, let's call it that way. So it's a libertarian approach of the conflict, and I've already known, overall about this vision. And in my opinion, it makes way more sense than the traditional view, of being a war against slavery. Like the North, they were, super good and enlightened and superior morally, and the South was, was ruled by barbarians, racists that want to, enslave black people forever. And Abraham Lincoln was elected and he won the war and ended slavery, and America, was made an empire. And this is so I don't know if that's a word in English. I think it's not. So that seems so exaggerated, I would say. Like too much. That's too much. The praxeologic view makes way more sense for me, which is the South wants freedom. Okay, they have slaves. That's a huge problem. People are incoherent and people commit evil. But overall, they want more freedom. They want more liberty. They want a more decentralized authority. And the North didn't. The North want a strong federal government, and they use a lot of tactics, especially economic tactics, like tariffs, and to harm the economy of the South. So during the 19th century, there were a very clear division in America regarding not only geographical and climatic differences, natural differences, but also like economical, commercial differences that were of course influenced by these natural differences. So the North was way older, not way older, but a bit older than the South in terms of being colonized. Let's use this word. And they were much more modern in terms of industries, and plants and all that. And the South was more agricultural in that sense. They would, produce more to export, and they depend a lot of the imports, not only from the North, but also from Europe. So the tariffs in the first place was something that would harm directly the South, not only in terms of imports, of not allowing them to look for the best price, but also because of that, it would harm their possibility of exporting, of course, because you would have less capacity of leverage. They would have less leverage capacity. And because of that, this was like the how can I say that in English? The catalyzer, I would say, of the war. Of course, there was the slave question, and that's a huge discussion. And Mark Thornton is very honest here. He talks about the two sides of this story, And some historian says that slavery, it would inevitably end. You know, it was like at the end of the slavery, the Civil War was not like in a moment in which the slavery was in a peak. No, it would eventually end. You know, because of much, not only of the moral reasons. You know, people were waking up about how insane and grotesque slavery is. There is this thing, but also economical reasons. You know, and which is something that was already kind of known. You know, like Turgot. I'm reading Turgot now. He talks a little bit about that. How enslaved it's much more of an old structure, and when economy develops naturally, slaves would tend to be way more expensive and disposable. You know, it would be more economically reasonable to not have slaves. So, you know, but he also showed a data about how the prices of the slaves was like very high during the 1850s, I would say. And he argues that it's more of a lobby, you know. So it was like an artificial inflation, not a naturally economical price, you know, that would reflect the real preferences of the economical agents. You know, it was more of a lobby price. That's his argument. But anyways, and then the war began, you know. So was the North was I don't remember who was the president before Lincoln. I'm sorry, but Lincoln was the president through most of the war. I think the war was from 1861 or 62. I don't remember now. Let me see here. Civil War, USA. Just a second, guys. Yeah, 1861 to 1865. And I think Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1862, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Abraham. He was elected in. No, so when the war began, he was already the president of the United States, but during the war, he was basically the president. He was in fact the president of the North. You know, the South was ruled by President Jefferson Davis, I think. Jefferson Davis. And I think it was Jefferson Davis, his name. He was the president of the Confederate Union, you know? I'm sorry, not Confederate Union. He was the president of the Confederates. Union was the name of the colonies, the Union of the colonies in the North. So it was Union against Confederates. And so Abraham Lincoln was in fact the president of the Union, and Thomas Davis, or Jefferson Davis, was the president of the Confederates. And another important question regarding the monetary issues, the banking question. People in the South, and that's not like crystal clear, and Rothbard talks about it in his book, The Panic of 1819. This banking issue, it was not like really clear, the division, it was like mixed. So there were people in the North that would support inflation, and there were people in the South that would support hard money, for example, which is counterintuitive if you think praxeologically, in terms of, maintaining the status quo. So it's not like crystal clear, but in general, let's say that the South would defend a more solid banking system, the Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson views, sound money, 100% backed by specie, and the North would defend a bit more of a inflationist politics, and that's okay. That's the another issue that was happening before the war. And there's a very interesting article that he quotes here, talking about Jacksonian banking theory before the Civil War, which is very interesting. I didn't read it. I haven't read it yet, but I want to. Anyways, and so the war start, and as I said, one of the tariffs were one of the biggest weapons that the North used, to harm the South, and they used blockades, to prevent goods, almost like a siege, let's say, like a modern siege, to prevent goods from entering, the South Sea. And so in this regarding this was interesting because he shows the power of the free market, because the the majority of the blockade runners, people who would, risk, entrepreneurs who would risk their lives to try to, pass these blockades and sell their goods, they were private, they were, regular individuals. They were not like financed by the state or anything like that. The majority of them were free entrepreneurs. That's insane. That's so nice. And so yeah, this was one of the biggest weapons that the North used. This economical weapon of preventing your enemy to trade. To trading, prevent your enemy from trading. And what is interesting about it, and this paid a huge. It made a huge damage in the South. But another thing that he talks about is how the war was financed. Because we know that governments, when they have a war, they usually finance with inflation. And both of the the sides of the war did that. But the thing is, the South was way more inflationist than the North. The North used way more rational politics to finance its war. They used inflation, yes, but they were way more reasonable. Not only they used way more taxation, for example, and way less selling of government bonds, for example. And the South, no, the South was like maybe I think it was like 70% of the war was financed through inflation, and that's weird. That's very counterintuitive, and that shows how the state usually do bad things regarding economics. And another interesting thing that he says about here is how the state, the South would react to these blockades. As I said, was private entrepreneurs would try to pass through these blockades, but insanely, I don't know why, President Davis would forbid that. They would forbid private blockade runners, and some very famous blockade runners. He shows some quotes here in this book, like they say, like, if there weren't for the regulations, and all the quotas and all the taxes, oh my God, taxes, and people who are trying to help them, how this would affect the commerce and harm the South, lowering their capacity of reacting, so it's insane how the state would do everything wrong. And then the South was beaten. I'm talking in very general terms. I'm not being very specific, but because of that, he gives the economical reasons for the fall of the South. And because of that, and economical reasons, as I said, they lost the war, and the North was won it. And what is interesting, he talks about it at the end, was how the Civil War is like the most important conflict in America's history. That's what he says here, and it is. How Americans are. They're very self-centered, but they have arguments for that, for the Civil War being, as we say in Brazil, the divisor of waters, in their history. And why? Because after that, the United States of America became way more centralized, and Mark Thornton gives here a lot of examples of acts, in the Congress that would, increases the power of the federal government after the Civil War. So I'm gonna say some of them here. Not only after the war, but during the war. So income tax, expanded postal service, which is happens at a federal level here, at the federal level in the U.S. Not only in the U.S. but also here in Brazil. Department of Agriculture during the war too. The banking acts that would centralized some important functions like conceding monopoly to state banks to issue notes, for example, and stating like measurements, like centralized measures through the government, not allowing this choices of unities and measures to be made by individuals, in terms of using economic reason rather than some decree from a bureaucrat. Contract Labor Act too. Money order system, railway mail service, office of immigration, transcontinental railroad land grants. So that's a very interesting thing that he says. America became way more centralized, not only economically but also politically. The South would have way more the decision-making structure. It would be way more decentralized in the South. I remember when I read that in high school, and I was one, how can I say that? And I was I forgot the word, but anyways, I was impressed. Goodly impressed, well impressed by how modern they look. Their organizational structure in terms of political decision making. And this ended with not ended, but was very hard, after the Civil War. So it's basically that. I think I didn't forget anything else. As I said, another very interesting thing. He talks about the Rhett Butler effect, which is very interesting. It's basically it's basically what happens when the government tries to influence or to regulate the prices of transportation and makes luxury goods way more economically appraisable than regular goods. So you see like a huge influx of a luxury good during times of scarcity, in times of war. That's crazy, to think like we are in the war and we don't have bread, but we have like brioche or croissant, which is a bit expensive, or fancy dresses, or liquor and things like that, and that has the economic explanation, and it's linked with how the South would react to the blockades, taxing blockade runners, trying to make their work even harder than already was, and this would make transportation fees way higher. So transporting high value goods, goods with way high aggregated value, way more interesting, in terms of economical viability. So relatively, it would make sense for the blockade runner, for example, to bring more luxury goods, and relatively less regular goods, common goods, and then what the government, what the South, the Confederates did to regarding this situation, they would tax way more luxury goods, or they would restrict the amount of luxury goods that it would be able to be commercialized, let's say. And of course that this not only affected luxury good but also the common goods, of course, because you raise the taxes for everyone, especially the goods which has which have more for much more of a smaller margin, such as the common goods. So it makes the situation even worse. Oh my God, that's insane. As I said, I wrote a lot about it here. Look at my book. Look how it is. I'm gonna show you. I like to make notes all the time, like a kid. My books looks always a mess, My books look always a mess. Look. And I wrote like, what are these guys doing? Come on, that's insane. So the South, in terms of economics, which is counterintuitive, as I said, because they were way more closer of good practices than the North. They did everything wrong. They harmed themselves by the measures that they took economically, unfortunately. But anyways, that was it. I think I didn't forget anything. He talks about the slavery question, but he talks more about how after the war, like the 1870s, 80s, and early 20th century, the politics that the North did harmed way more than the Afro Americans or how can I say, ex-slaves? No, you guys used another word for that. But anyways, people that were slaves or were like sons and daughters and were relative with slaves, they were affected by the policies implemented and defended by the people in the North. So yeah, that's it. A bit of a huge video, but it's a very interesting topic. It's a very interesting book, although it's small. But anyways, that's it. Feel free to leave your comment here and tell if you like it or not. And yeah, guys, bye-bye. Have a blessed Sunday.